Okay, section 1.3. Now we get into subtracting integers. The last two sections were adding, now we're getting into subtracting. This, I would argue, is typically, traditionally, the most confusing part of this standard 7.NS.1. That's because when we subtract, well, if we have three positives and we subtract, if we take away two positives, then yeah, we're obviously only going to have one positive left. That's just 3 minus 2 is 1. That's fine. It's when we get into taking three negatives and subtracting two negatives, that's where we're not adding three negatives and two negatives to get five negatives. We're taking away two of these negatives because we have three negatives and we're taking away two of them. So we end up with only one negative left over. So yeah, we can wrap our head around that. That kind of makes sense. But what happens is we end up with things like three positives minus two negatives, and that's the kind of problem that we really need to talk through, and where students really need to be able to understand it well enough to talk to other people about so that it makes sense. Because if we can't explain why this kind of problem works, then we're going to forget whatever tips and tricks we learned to figure it out without really understanding what's happening. So stay with me as I go through this particular set of examples, okay? Now, to model, to show, to actually prove subtraction with negative numbers, we start with a pretty simple one where we have four negatives and we're going to take away three negatives. All right, that's very similar to this one that I talked through, the second example I talked through here. So let's say we start with four negative counters. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see those four negatives? That's the four negatives we're starting with. Okay, that's negative 4. Now we're going to take away three negatives. They put a box around these three because these are the ones we're going to take away. So that's the negative 3. So we have four negative counters, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to remove three negative counters, 1, 2, 3. And what are we going to be left with? One negative counter. One negative counter. All right? So find the difference. We got negative 4, we take away negative 3, we end up with negative 1. All right? So again, you will want to learn how to talk through this with somebody. And you can use different numbers. You can do negative 5 minus negative 2, negative 3 minus negative 1. You know, there's all kinds of ways you just change the numbers and practice explaining to somebody how this works. But let's go to the next example. All right? This is taking 6 positives. All right? And then we're going to subtract some negatives. That's this example that I was talking about up here. We're going to really pay attention to this example. So if we have 6 positives, okay, we're starting with 6 positives. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? So that is our positive 6. So in order to take away 3 negative counters, don't finish that sentence. I want you to stop and realize that you need to take away 3 negative counters, but look, if you're starting with 6 positives, you don't have any negative counters to take away. So when they say, just add 3 zero pairs, well, okay, why are we adding 3 zero pairs? So that we have negatives to take away. That is what's missing from this step, is that understanding that we're adding 0 pairs so that we can take away 3 negatives. All right? That's the part you really need to explain when you're showing somebody how to do this. So once you add 3 zero pairs, and remember, this is 0, this is 0, this is 0, so what is it? All of this is still positive 6, all right? So if we take away 3 negative counters, 1, 2, 3, now it's no longer positive 6, because now we have the 6 that we started with the 3 positives that we just are now here left over from those 0 pairs. So now we have how many positive counters? We have 9 positive counters. So 6 minus negative 3 is 9. Now, the answer, yes, is positive 9. But what I want you to notice is some students get this, some students take a while to kind of see this little shortcut, but if you're subtracting a negative number, you are essentially adding that positive, okay? You're adding that absolute value. So that's a little trick that you can use. But using counters, it helps us to understand that in the physical world that we live in, it does actually work, okay? So now, the last example is where we take a negative number, 2 negatives, and we take away more negatives than we started with. So if we have 2 negative counters, can we remove 5 negatives? No, we don't have 5 negatives to take away. So what do we think we're going to do? And I'll give you a hint. It has to do with 0 pairs. Well, the directions here, if we just read the book and think through what's going on, if we start with 2 counters and we need to take away 5 counters, then we have to add how many 0 pairs? We have 2. We need to take away 5. So in order to take away 5, we're going to add 3 0 pairs. All right, okay. So we're going to take away 5 negative, right? We're going to take away 5 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are we left with? We're going to take away 5 counters. So what's left? What are we left with? 3 positive counters. So the difference, negative 2 minus, there we go. The difference, negative 2 minus negative 5, is positive 3. Now, I do want to show you how this works on a number line, but keep in mind, I'm going to show you that in the next page. All right? But really quick, I just want to show you this on a number line, this example. Because if we start at, let's say, no, that's too far over. Let's start here. All right? That's 0. Cool? So we're going to start at negative 2. Cool? And we're going to take away negatives. If this was negative, if this was negative 2, take away negative 1, then we would just start at negative 2, and we would remove a negative. Well, wouldn't that just be doing that? Take away a negative, and you have 1 less negative, don't you? Because we took away a negative. So negative 2 minus negative 1 would just be negative 1, right? Because what is negative 2 plus 1? That would be negative 1. And we could see it on the number line. Negative 2, take away a negative, and you have negative 1. We have 1 negative. All right? But here we're starting at negative 2. Now watch this. We're going to take away 5 negatives. So we're going to take away 1 negative, 2 negative, 3 negative, 4 negative, 5 negative. So that's negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Did you see that? We are subtracting a negative, which is the same as adding a positive. So we are adding a positive when we subtract a negative. I know, this is something that you have to practice. This isn't something I'm just gonna say it and you learn it. That's not how this works, all right? So find negative 1 minus 5 on a number line, okay? So what we want to pay attention to is rewriting subtraction as addition of the opposite. And what this means is when we do the addition of the opposite, negative 1 minus 5 is the same as negative 1 plus negative 5. Okay? I'm just going to put that in and I'm going to explain that one more time a little bit differently. If you have negative 1 minus 5, all right? Negative 1 minus 5. Okay, you're subtracting 5, which is 5 positives. You're subtracting 5. That's going to be the same as negative 1. Okay? Adding the opposite. So if we start at negative 1 here and move 5 units to the left, what we want to learn is why. How do we know? Why are we moving to the left? How do we know to move 5 units to the left to get to negative 6? Difference is negative 6. All right? How do we know to go to the left? Negative 1, we're subtracting an amount. We're subtracting a positive number. We are subtracting a positive, aren't we? That's just subtraction. We move to the left. No big deal. So here, if we're taking a negative number, we start at negative 7, and we're subtracting negative 3, then just add the opposite, okay? We're going to take this, and we're just going to add the 3. We're going to add 3. So we start at negative 7 and add 3. So we're removing, in this case, subtracting negatives. We have negative 7, we have 7 negatives, and we're just taking away negatives. That's all. So the number of negatives goes down. So when we subtract negatives, we're going this way. Okay? So we start at negative 7, we move 3 units to the right, and the difference is negative 6, negative 5, negative 4. Negative 4. Now, here, when we get into the guided practice and the independent practice, what you need to be able to explain is not just that 5 minus 8 is negative 3, okay, or that negative 5 minus negative 3 is negative 5 plus 3, which is negative 2. It's not enough to know what the answer is. You have to explain how to find each difference, and Yeah, I mean, if you're using counters, there's a way to do that. There's a way to explain how to do this using counters. And that's what you want to practice doing. You want to use a number line to find the difference. All right, that's what we're practicing doing. Start it at -4. Subtract 5. Yeah, which is the same as -4 adding 5 negatives. So this is just these are just examples to help you practice explaining how to do this. And so what I want you to understand about what these sections are doing is all of these sections are focused on number sense standard 1 for 7th grade, adding and subtracting rational numbers. All right, so this is 1C, but ultimately all of this is focused on adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. All right, so here we get NS3. That's a different standard. This is where we use word problems involving adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing rational numbers. So I'm not going to do this right now, but just know that these different standards teach different things. So you're going to want to pay attention to what standard you're working on. So I'll go to this lesson next.